Let me tell you something the history books on 100 different worlds now agree on, even though none of them like admitting it. Humans were supposed to be a joke. Soft skin, slow reflexes, no natural weapons to speak of, and an embarrassing tendency to get sunburned on their own homeworld. When the Coalition fleet let humanity join up, most species treated it the way you'd treat a golden retriever wandering onto a battlefield. Cute. Harmless. Definitely going to get eaten first. This is the story of how that golden retriever rewrote the rules of war, and how one very tired, very sarcastic man named Marcus Whitlock became the name alien children are quietly warned about at bedtime. Marcus served aboard the Coalition flagship Vantage's Reach, the only human out of a crew of nearly 4,000. His official title was Tactical Support Officer, 3rd Class, which was fleet speak for the guy who reorganizes supply manifests and occasionally gets asked to fetch coffee, except coffee doesn't exist here, so he fetches whatever the Dravith drink that smells like burnt rubber. The Dravith, tall reptilian types with an ego problem the size of a moon, called him the Pet. Not affectionately. General Korath Vess, the Dravith's top strategist and a man who wore his medals like other people wear personality, found humans especially amusing. "Tell me, Whitlock," he'd say during briefings, "does your species still fight with rocks, or have you advanced to sharp rocks?" Marcus would just shrug and say something like, "Depends on the rock. Some of them are surprisingly effective." Nobody laughed. Nobody ever laughed at his jokes. That should have been everyone's first clue that something was off, because a species that couldn't take a hint that dry was clearly not paying attention to anything else either. The Calvern, an insectoid species built like walking tanks, mostly ignored him, which was actually the closest thing to respect he got. And the Athesi, a floaty, telepathic species who communicated in soft musical tones, seemed genuinely confused by humans as a concept. One of them asked him once, quite sincerely, "How do you fight without claws? Do you simply apologize very aggressively?" "Sometimes," Marcus said. "Works better than you'd think." Then came the War Games. Every year the Coalition ran a massive joint simulation to showcase tactical excellence among the member species, and every year it was basically a parade for whichever species felt like flexing that century. This year, General Vess wanted his moment. He arranged the team assignments personally, which was against protocol, but nobody argued with a general who had that many teeth. Marcus got dumped onto what the fleet unofficially called Team Scrap. A ragtag assortment of understrength ships, outdated tech, and crews nobody else wanted, led by, of all people, the Pet. It was a joke, and everyone knew it was a joke, including the people forced to be part of it. General Vess made the whole thing official during the pre-simulation briefing, standing in front of the entire assembled fleet like he was announcing a wedding instead of a war game. "I will wager my entire collection of Dravith war medals," he announced, drawing himself up to his full, extremely dramatic height, "that Team Scrap surrenders within the first 10 minutes. The room laughed. Marcus, standing at the back, just checked his watch. Humans didn't actually wear watches anymore in this era, but he'd kept the habit because it annoyed people when he looked bored during their speeches. The simulation kicked off, and Team Scrap's crews were about as enthusiastic as prisoners walking to their own sentencing. Marcus, though, was calm in a way that made his officers nervous. He started issuing orders that made absolutely no sense by any tactical doctrine currently taught in Coalition academies. Split the fleet into 4 uneven groups. Send the weakest ship straight at the enemy's strongest formation. Power down long-range sensors on 2 vessels entirely. Retreat a full third of the fleet into a nearby asteroid field that every alien tactics manual specifically warned against entering. On the enemy bridge, watching the live feed, officers were practically in tears laughing. "He's panicking," someone said. "Look at this, he doesn't even understand basic formation theory." Marcus, meanwhile, sipped his burnt rubber-smelling drink and muttered to his second-in-command, a nervous Calver named Dresk, "They're going to feel very silly in about 6 minutes." Dresk, who did not share Marcus's confidence, made a sound that in Calvern body language roughly translates to "Oh no, we are all going to die." Here's the thing nobody in the coalition understood about humans. Their entire species had spent thousands of years fighting wars without the luxury of superior firepower, because for most of human history, nobody had superior firepower. So instead, they got creative. Viciously, relentlessly creative. Ambushes. Decoys. Feigned retreats. Poisoning wells, faking surrenders, hiding armies inside horses, whatever it took. Humans didn't fight fair because fighting fair usually meant losing. Marcus's panicked, disorganized fleet was actually a trap so old that human military academies taught it to teenagers. The weak ship charging the enemy's strongest formation wasn't a suicide run, it was bait, drawing their best assets out of formation. The powered-down sensors weren't malfunctions, they were there to make two ships look abandoned and unimportant, right up until they weren't. And the retreat into the asteroid field wasn't panic, it was luring the enemy fleet into terrain that Marcus had quietly mapped down to the meter beforehand, because unlike everyone else, he'd actually bothered to read the simulation's environmental data instead of assuming Team Scrap would just lose regardless. The enemy fleet, gloating and overextended, followed the bait straight into the asteroid field. Marcus's abandoned ships lit back up and opened fire from angles nobody had accounted for. The weak, charging ship peeled off at the last second and revealed it had been hurting the enemy's strongest formation directly into a crossfire the entire time. On the enemy bridge, the laughter stopped. Someone actually whispered, "Wait, what is happening?" It took 11 minutes. Team Scrap didn't just win, they dismantled the favored team so thoroughly that the simulation's damage assessment system had to be double-checked because the numbers looked like an error. General Vessa's team surrendered with over 60% of their simulated fleet destroyed and the rest scattered and cut off from resupply. The bridge of the Vantage's reach fell into stunned silence. General Vess, red-faced in whatever way Dravith turned red, stormed onto the comm channel demanding an explanation, as though Marcus had cheated instead of simply outthought him. "You said Team Scrap would surrender in 10 minutes, Marcus said, entirely deadpan, checking his watch again out of habit. "We're 11 minutes in. Sorry to disappoint. I can throw in the towel now if it'll make you feel better about the medals." Somewhere on the bridge, Dresk the Calvern made a sound that this time translated closer to "Oh, thank the hive, we are not going to die after all." Word of the simulation spread through the coalition faster than a scandal, which, let's be honest, it basically was. Officers who had never given humans a second thought suddenly wanted to know everything about human military history, and what they found did not help them sleep better. Coalition analysts pulled up records on something called the Trojan Horse and had a collective crisis. They found a general named Sun Tzu who apparently wrote an entire book about winning without fighting, which seemed almost insulting to species that prided themselves on fighting constantly. They found records of something called guerrilla warfare, world wars fought with millions of casualties and terrifying industrial efficiency, and a man named Genghis Khan who conquered half a continent using tactics that made coalition strategists physically put their heads down on the briefing table. One Ethesi analyst reportedly had to leave a briefing room after reading about something called the element of surprise, applied to an event called Pearl Harbor, muttering softly that humans do not fight, they perform elaborate betrayals with explosions attached. Marcus went from the pet to a name said in hushed tones. Nobody called him that anymore. Mostly they just called him Whitlock, carefully, like saying it too casually might summon him. Of course, a simulation is one thing. The galaxy doesn't care about your reputation until it's actually trying to kill you, and about 4 months after the war games, it got its chance. The Threxel Dominion, a hostile empire that had been probing coalition borders for years, launched a full assault on a critical outpost called Halcyon Station. Command was in chaos. 3 admirals had already lost ships trying conventional formations against a Threxel fleet that outnumbered them and, worse, fought with brutal, disciplined efficiency. General Vess, of all people, was the one forced to make the call. Standing in the war room with his pride visibly dying somewhere behind his eyes, he opened a channel to Marcus's quarters. "Whitlock," he said, the word costing him something physical to say. "We require your tactical input." Marcus, lying on his bunk reading an actual paper book because some habits die hard, glanced at the comm. "You're asking nicely this time. That's new. Did somebody take your medals already?" Whitlock. "Fine, fine. Give me the tactical display. And somebody get Dresk, he's good at pretending not to panic, it's calming." They gave him emergency tactical command of the defense fleet, which by that point was less a fleet and more a collection of increasingly desperate ships trying not to die. Marcus looked over the Threxel formation and immediately clocked their weakness. They were disciplined, sure, brutally so, but rigid. Every maneuver followed the same doctrine, the same predictable rhythms, because their entire military culture valued order above improvisation. Humans, on the other hand, had spent their whole existence improvising, usually badly, sometimes brilliantly, but never predictably. Marcus split the defense fleet again, same trick as before but dressed up differently so nobody watching would recognize the bones of it until it was too late. He sacrificed a decoy formation, drawing the Threxel's main strike force deep into the station's debris field, an area their rigid formation protocol specifically told them to avoid, which of course made it exactly where Marcus wanted them. While the Threxel commander bellowed something that translated roughly to a battle cry about glorious annihilation, Marcus quietly rerouted power from 3 disabled ships and hit their flank from an angle their sensors hadn't been calibrated to expect, because why would you expect an attack from ships you'd already logged as destroyed? "This is either going to work beautifully," Marcus told Dresk, watching the tactical display with the enthusiasm of a man watching mildly interesting weather, "or we're all going to die in a very embarrassing way. Try not to think about it too hard." It worked beautifully. The Threxel strike force, overextended and boxed in, collapsed within 20 minutes. Halcyon Station held. The coalition didn't just survive the assault, they broke the back of the Threxel offensive so badly the Dominion pulled back from the border entirely for the next several months, apparently deciding that fighting the species with the horrifying track record of polite betrayal followed by total annihilation wasn't worth it this year. They promoted Marcus after that, obviously. Fleet Commander Whitlock has a nice ring to it, even if he insisted the title change to his door plaque was completely unnecessary and a waste of coalition resources. His name started appearing in strategy textbooks across a dozen species, usually with footnotes explaining what several of his tactics meant in the original human, because apparently words like feint and decoy didn't translate cleanly into languages built by species who'd never needed to lie their way out of a fair fight. The galaxy had judged humans by the wrong measurements the whole time. They looked at claws and didn't have any. They looked at natural armor and found soft skin instead. They looked at raw strength and saw a species that got winded jogging up a flight of stairs. What they never bothered checking was the one thing humans had spent their entire violent, complicated history perfecting, the willingness to win by any means that worked, and the imagination to invent new means when the old ones ran out. Other species started studying human history with the specific, nervous energy of someone reading a manual titled, How to Survive the Thing That Just Beat You, which, frankly, was accurate. Years later, when a young officer nervously asked Fleet Commander Whitlock the secret to his success, expecting some profound military philosophy, Marcus just shrugged and said, "Rule 1, nobody plays fair. Rule 2, if they think you're too weak to matter, let them keep thinking that for as long as possible." The officer waited for more. There wasn't any more. Because that's really the whole story, isn't it? The galaxy spent centuries measuring strength in claws, armor, and raw firepower, and never noticed the quiet little species in the corner who'd learned, the hard way, over and over again, that the most dangerous weapon in any war has never been the biggest gun. It's the mind willing to use it in a way nobody saw coming. Humanity brought that mind to the stars. The galaxy is still catching up.